Morning, everyone. Hope you all have your coffee. Thanks for checking in. We're excited to talk to you a little bit today about attack surface management and how it can work with pen testing and be complementary. So, first, just some brief introductions. I'm Mike Kelly. I'm the CEO of ProcessBolt. I'll be kicking things off. Joining me, want to introduce yourself, guys?
Sure. Hello, this is Gaurav. I'm part of the ProcessBolt team. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here, and on to Alex.
I'm Alex Crittenden. I'm the Vice President at White Oak Security, a deep dive pen testing company.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And we'll just get right into it. We want to be efficient with your time today. So we will get started here and just start. So the topic today is attack surface management, how it works in a complementary fashion with pen testing. So we want to start first with a description of attack surface management, kind of what it is. Basically, what it is a method of identifying certain assets, forgotten or otherwise, and in the course of it, you identify these assets. Once the assets are identified, the system will generate alerts on new vulnerabilities as they emerge. So essentially, it's continuous monitoring of your internet-facing attack surfaces. Anything that might be exposed to the internet will be identified and can be monitored on a truly continuous basis. We're not talking about batch data here that can be old once it's loaded onto the system, but truly continuous. And the thing about attack surface management is that it can scale as companies add employees, vendors, equipment, customers, etc., and as access to the cloud becomes more and more prevalent, increasing amounts of endpoints and things. Attack surface management will scale because it'll identify those assets on a continuous basis and add them essentially to your list of known assets. The way it works is you basically take one or more of your domains, internet domains. Then the attack surface management function will look for other domains and other internet-facing assets that are associated with those domains. And since it's continuous, assets are found and evaluated as they emerge over time. So I guess the first question is, what assets do we own? And we're always surprised when we meet with new customers and we onboard them on how often we are able to identify assets that they didn't even know were out there, databases that were spun up by an employee or things that were forgotten. And obviously, if they're unknown assets, they're impossible to secure. You don't know about them. So we've seen that most organizations don't even maintain a complete inventory of internet exposed assets and who's responsible for maintaining them and updating them, which frankly are table stakes for cybersecurity right now. You have to have that list. You have to have assignments. They have to be continuously monitored, whether it's DNS servers, IoT devices, websites, cloud assets, VPNs, etc. You have to have an inventory and has to be monitored. There are obviously numerous breaches attributable to previously unknown or uninventoried assets, and this is a very good example of one. And one of the key risks, I mean, it used to be that when you had a breach, the average cost of mitigating that breach, $3.86 million. And that was it. You'd mitigate the breach, you'd pay the cost, either the ransomware or the remediation mitigation efforts, and you go from there. Now what's happening is we're seeing the class action lawyers pile on because this is a known risk. And if you're not protecting your organization from a known risk, you'll not only suffer the costs of mitigation of that breach, but you will undoubtedly suffer a class action suit by lawyers that are eager to, generate a little return. Here you can see in the Equifax suit, very specifically, they highlight that Equifax did not maintain an accurate inventory of its publicly facing technology assets, which were ultimately penetrated. And every time we run a Threadscape report for a customer on either their own organization or one of their critical vendors, undoubtedly we find something that is surprising to everyone. So it is a critical area of importance and one that you need to incorporate now in your general security protocols. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Gaurav. And Gaurav, you can take it and get into a little more detail on what this means and how to do it.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike described, The key function of attack surface management, number one, is to identify what assets do you own. But when you think about this problem, it is a very hard problem to solve. You have assets spanning your entire organization, and they could be part of your network infrastructure. For example, network servers or firewalls or VPN systems. All the way to applications, right? Your employee-facing applications that might be exposed to the internet, your email servers, your messaging, endpoint systems like operating systems, and these days even your own devices that are on a corporate network, right? Employee devices, point of sale systems, even physical security endpoints, right? But the biggest threat that we are seeing emerging these days is cloud-based assets, right? So it's, as everybody realizes, it is extremely easy these days to spin up a cloud system. Sometimes you have employees experimenting with a feature and they would just spin up a server on the cloud, put some data in there to test things out, and then just forget about it. So you have all these cloud-based assets that might be unprotected, might not be following the best practices, either experimental or actual applications. That if you're not maintaining an inventory, and if you don't have an attack surface management system, they're just forgotten. And like Mike said, you can't protect what you don't know about. And then last but not the least, one of the critical things that we are seeing an increasing amount of is your third-party vendors, right? And you can protect your assets, you can do attack surface management on your own assets, but who's looking after your vendors' assets, right? When you're sharing data with them, who is monitoring what you're sharing? Is your vendor protected on the internet? What does their attack surface look like, right? So these are the different aspects you need to be aware of when you're designing an attack surface management system and an attack surface management program within your organization. So what are some of the key features of a good attack surface management system, right? Number one, like Mike said, it shouldn't be, a point in time, attack surface viewpoint, right? It has to be continuous in nature. You cannot have a software system implemented that looks at your attack surface every 3 months, every 6 months, because that defeats the purpose. A lot can happen in 3 months. It just defeats the purpose of you being aware of what your attack surface looks like. So it has to be continuous in nature. It has to identify your attack surfaces correctly and accurately and rule out false positives. Then it has to cross-check against threat information, right? What is being seen on the open internet? Are there breach reports out there? Are there ransomware threats out there? And how do your assets line up to that? Identify critical red flags, right? And again, that is one of the things. If we throw every asset at you, and if we identify everything that asset can do to your organization, then it becomes a moot point because you will not be able to prioritize what to fix first. So a good system will have to identify the red flags and prioritize them so you can actually fix these issues. And last but not the least, it has to alert you, right? As soon as that, and that goes with the continuous monitoring aspect, right? So as soon as it finds something on a daily or a weekly basis, it has to be able to alert you to the presence of a new threat. And what are some of the benefits, right? You as an organization, the benefits are fairly obvious, right? You will be able to uncover risks and threats before they become an actual risk to your organization, before hackers discover it, before the various parties on the internet are able to discover it. But if you are talking about third parties, again, those third parties, if you're including them in your attack surface management system, your vendors, then you're also able to mitigate the risks that those vendors can pose to your organization or your supply chain. So here we're going to talk about ProcessBolt's Threadscape system a little bit here. It is a continuous attack surface management software. It looks at your organization's assets on a continuous daily basis. It also looks at your vendor attack surface on a daily basis. And the way to get started with Threadscape is very straightforward. You plug in one of the known domains of any organization, including your own. Our systems, our data lake either will have that information on that company or that asset, or we will go out and find everything related to that organization or that domain, including sister assets, servers, other domains that are present. And we just instantaneously load everything that is available and start kind of, updating the data behind it. And then we do continuous monitoring on a daily basis. So as soon as something new is found, or as soon as a new threat is found, we will alert you and we will flag those risks for you. The other thing that we also do with ProcessBolt Threadscape is ProcessBolt is a risk assessment platform, right? So our primary function is, attack surface management, but also, let's not call it B, but A.2 is to be able to assess your third parties, on any assessment criteria. And what we do is we combine these two pieces of information. So when you're assessing a vendor or when you're assessing a business unit on an industry standard questionnaire like a NIST or your homegrown questionnaire, if we see an answer or a question in that assessment that relates to an attack surface risk that we have found at that organization, we're able to automatically correlate that. So, for example, if you're asking your vendor, do you encrypt your data or do you encrypt internet traffic? And they say yes. It's very easy to say yes to that. How do you verify that? Well, Threadscape does that for you. So as soon as they say yes, we are able to correlate their answer back to what we have seen on the open internet for this vendor, and we are able to say, okay, yeah, this vendor is telling you a yes, but when we verify that information, we have found that they do have some assets on the internet that do not follow this protocol. So then you are able to raise that issue with a third party or with your business unit, get that issue mitigated before it becomes a bigger problem. So how does that all relate to pen testing, right? And Alex is going to talk to you more about that. But when you're doing pen testing, it gives you an internal view of the world, your own internal organization. What we have talked about is how does your external view of the world can be managed with the attack surface management system, and how can that relate to your assessment information. But on to you, Alex, on more about pen testing.
Alex, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure,
Let me just
go
say
for it.
one thing. I forgot in my introduction to tell you folks, you'll notice in the side margin of the presentation, there's a question mark and an opportunity to ask questions. So please, as you listen to Alex, if you have questions from what Garv presented, please enter those questions, and then we'll get to those at the end. We'll leave time at the end to answer your questions. Sorry to interrupt, Alex.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Garv and Mike. So as they mentioned, I'm with White Oak Security. We're one of the leading deep dive technical penetration testing companies in the country. And he mentioned, we talked about earlier about attack surface management and sort of how it ties into penetration testing. And so I'm kind of here to talk a little bit more about that. And truthfully, it ties directly into it. I mean, we are, we provide penetration testing services, as it says here, and our job is to think like an attacker and to find vulnerabilities and deal with remediation, provide guidance on, how to prioritize remediation and the like. But we can't really do any of that effectively if we don't actually know what we're testing, right? And we can test assets that our clients ask us to test, and we can do that very, very well. But if the client has assets that they don't know about, we're obviously not asked to test them. So the important part of some of this stuff for us is, understanding what the attack surface is really the first step in a penetration test, right? It's what allows us to sort of build our attack plan. And without knowing a good understanding of the attack surface, it's very difficult for us to help our clients understand where to focus our testing efforts. And where their risk actually lies, because we may have a good understanding of that from given the environment we know about, but how does the environment we don't know about fit in? Obviously, it doesn't fit in at all, and therefore it's wide open typically. But anyway, I digress. What we do is application infrastructure, mobile pen testing. And we also provide red team services and purple team services or threat emulation. And again, this is, understanding what your attack surface is sort of critical for these services as well. There's an interesting story about red team and how and sort of attack surface management. I'll get to in a little bit, but red team is basically us acting as a pretending we're a malicious attacker, not telling most of the client personnel what we're doing, being stealthy, shooting for a particular goal, and not getting caught. That's sort of the goal of the red team, right? And the goals of that individual red team kind of depend on what the client's trying to accomplish. But that's sort of what we go about doing. The purple team is similar. Threat emulation is similar, except that we are, the client's blue team. And that's where the purple comes from, red plus blue. The client's blue team or defensive team is very much aware of what we're doing. And our goal in that exercise is really to evaluate, are there, defensive tools working appropriately? Are they tuned properly? Are they missing something? Are there people trained properly? Are their processes effective in terms of how to defend or to mitigate attack? And these are all really cool services and really interesting and really in depth and really technical. But the problem is if the client doesn't understand their attack surface, a lot of these very interesting and very important exercises are sort of, I wouldn't say made useless, but they're certainly not nearly as effective as they should be, because even if you tighten down your environment that we know about, throw loads of assets and money and time and technical know-how at it and lock it down as best as possible, if you have an entire environment out here that you don't know about, it's awful hard to do that to it. So again, attack surface management is extremely important. Understanding what your attack surface is. So, a tool like Threadscape is really, really helpful in preparing not only yourselves to manage this stuff, but also preparing your partners like a pen testing company to actually get in and do effective testing. Again, why is it so important? As I mentioned, it's sort of the beginning point of any attack plan we make, right? What is actually out there? What does the client actually have? What is that? What do those assets look like? What attacks and what tools should we be using? What manual techniques should we be using? A lot of those determinations, or at least the initial attack plan, are usually based on what we know about the environment, and the more we know about the environment, the better. It's also something that is important for our client. We are a point-in-time testing organization generally, right? We get brought in to do a penetration test. Again, it's very deep, it's very good, yay us. But the problem is that we then disappear, right? We provide our recommendations. We explain to our clients how to prioritize remediation, how to do their remediation, but then we leave. If you want to pay us every day to do pen testing every day in your environment, that's great. I think it's probably cost prohibitive. And so we get brought in yearly, quarterly, monthly, depending on the need and the risk. But in between those tests, you need to keep an understanding of what your risks are. And it's not maybe necessarily, it'd be great if you had pen testing data coming in every day. But if nothing else, you need to be able to maintain an understanding of what your attack surface looks like, and continuous testing, like Threadscape provides. Continuous testing is going to be really, really important to understand what someone is spinning up, what someone is spinning down, what your newest acquisition that you've just brought into the company, what their IT department who's pissed off is, they don't want to deal with your processes, they want to spin something up so they can just get stuff done. You need to know these things are going on. One, so you can tell us about it when we come to the door pen test, but two, so that you can deal with any sort of risk that comes up in between those pen tests. Again, as it mentions here in the slide, is point X on the attack surface vulnerable to attack vector Y. Understanding what is in that environment, not just what the IPs are, but what sits behind those IPs, right? What is the system that sits behind them? Allows us to sort of understand the best ways of going about doing the pen testing, and basically helps us to help our clients understand what the priorities for remediation are, where the risks lie, and help them communicate, not only to the team that's going to be fixing it, but also up to the management, so that management understands what's, what the priorities and everything are. Again, understanding the attack surface thoroughly is going to help with that. I kind of mentioned why we fit together already. I mean, we really want to make sure we understand what we're testing, right? We can't legally go outside of what we've been given from a testing environment by the client. If we're we were testing Best Buy, you don't exactly, if you're doing a pen test for Best Buy and we suddenly start pen testing Target assets, that's going to be a problem. So we can't go outside of the scope we've been provided. The client can't go outside the scope of what they own or what they've been permissioned by their vendors or other partners to test. But they certainly can, and they also can't test anything they don't know about. So we want people to understand their attack surface. And frankly, understanding attack surface has been a massive problem in security for a long time. There is a problem with, as it says here on the slide, a large technical debt, right? A lot of companies, whether they're big, whether they're small, it doesn't really matter, have this problem. It might take different forms, but they still have the issue. Large clients may grow through, or large companies may grow through acquisition. Do you know everything that happens with every acquisition you've made? You've made 30 acquisitions in the last 10 years. Are you sure you've dealt with and accounted for all those IT assets? I would suggest you probably haven't. Same thing goes for smaller companies. They're technical people are spinning things up for tests. They're using they're spinning up cloud environments to see whether or not this the cloud environment works for the solution. These things don't always get decommissioned the way you would hope they would in an organized sense. And half the time, because they're supposed to be, quote, temporary, they're not told to IT or security. And then someone forgets to shut them down, and then they're no longer temporary, and you don't know about them. So this is, over the years, this basically has compounded on itself because there hasn't necessarily been a good way of understanding what's sitting out there and what's not accounted for. Tools like Threadscape are now available to organizations to go out there and actually find these assets that are sort of lost and yet somehow still connected to corporate network. So you may never be able to get to 100% coverage, but 90% coverage gives us, as best we can, I guess. If you get to 100, that's great. But again, we need to know what these assets are so that you can effectively manage them, so you can effectively understand the risk, and so that when we do pen testing, we can understand where that risk lies in the context of the overall organization. And again, the slide makes a comment about a mechanic, right, on a car. You can plug the computer into the car; it'll tell you exactly what's going wrong, but you don't really know the details or exactly how to fix it in many cases until you get your head under the hood, right? And that's what we do. We're the mechanic under the hood, checking to see exactly what the problems are, and that's what we do. And you need both. Just the last quick note here before I turn things back over. But I mentioned an example. We have a client, and I'm not going to name them, but on the East Coast, they're a large technology company. They provide software. Very in-depth and very intricate software solution to a particular industry. And they have grown by acquisition over the last 30 years. And one of the organizations, I guess the background is I was sitting having lunch with the director of security at the time, who's now their CISO. He's very good at his job. But we were chatting and we were talking about it. He just found out the week before that one of the acquisitions he made in California, or they had made in California, several years back, the salespeople didn't want to go through the hoops of dealing with corporate process and policy. So they spun up their own DC in California and didn't tell corporate about it, but they plugged it into corporate, of course. And so, he found out about it. It had been running for about a year and a half. And so we actually flipped the job we were going to be doing the next week from a pen test into a red team because the board wasn't understanding when this was a problem. And so during a red team exercise, we basically went into this, what was previously an unknown asset that was out, or asset pool that was out there. We got access to the environment because they were not properly managed by security and not locked down. And ultimately, we were able to demonstrate that we could make changes to the unknown changes to the corporate environment, corporate products, main product source code without anyone knowing about it. So we could have put anything we wanted into the solution they were deploying to clients. the board paid attention to that, and obviously they were able to take over the California thing and shut it down. But my point is, they didn't know about it until something. Basically, it was a conversation over lunch that he had found out about it as well, from an offhand comment. That isn't okay, right? You need to be able to understand what your assets are, and you need a way of continuously monitoring your attack surface. You just need to do this. I'll turn it over to Mike.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Now I'm going to keep it short and wrap up here because we do have one question. Please enter any other ones you have. But the key thing is, this combining pen testing and continuous monitoring attack surface management really gives you both an inside and outside view of the security posture of your organization and those of your critical vendors. It works hand in glove. Lessons are: know your assets, find your issues and vulnerabilities, and work with an entity like White Oak to get those remediated or mitigated rapidly. So that's it. Thanks for attending. We do have a question here, and please enter any more. I think, Gaurav, you're probably best suited to answer this. Who in an organization is best served to use Threadscape? Which team?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you think about your attack surface, right, and we discussed that a little bit, in some previous slides, it does touch a wide gamut of your organizational, surface, right, or your operations. But primarily, when you look at it today, it does fall under, either information security or your IT team, or a combination. Sometimes we do find that you have a separate vendor management team, and we're talking about third parties now. So they also need to be aware of your third party's attack surface. So if I had to pin it down to, who's best served, it would be your CISO's team, your IT team, and your vendor team. But at the end of the day, there is a growing movement in security of involving security from the start, right? From your DevOps and development stages. So the information that an ASM system like Threadscape presents can also be beneficial to your development teams as well, as they're spinning up and maybe not properly decommissioning cloud assets.
Excellent. If there are no further questions, chime in now. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for attending, everybody. And remember, make sure you're assessing your vendors and your supply chain regularly, schedule pen tests regularly, and make sure you have a system in place now that continuously monitors your internet-facing assets in real time. Those three measures will help improve your third-party risk security protocol and protect you effectively, as effectively as possible. Thanks again for your time. And feel free to reach out to either of us after this talk for any further questions you have. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.